I'm Mason Marangella, aka The Rig Doctor. This is your first time to the channel, welcome. Today, as you heard, I just got my brand new pedalboard built. This is something that has been a labor of love and it has been something in the making for over a year. I'm combining a switcher here in combination with a digital modeler, and I have analog effects that are all MIDI programmable. So this is sort of like the best of a switcher meets the best of all of the modeling stuff, meets my favorite analog distortion and drive pedals based on the stuff that I like, which is really along the lines of Stevie Ray Vaughan, John Mayer, Robin Ford, all the kind of classic dumble tones and more. And gosh, I can do the whole entire thing in this, and it's only 11 inches by 20 inches, and it's under 20 pounds all in. I'm gonna explain to you today how I made this, how to program it, and some alternatives that you can try out if you want to try to utilize the best of both worlds, just like I did in this rig. Now, a few things I want to tell you about before we get into this rig build. First off, we have a podcast, the Rig Doctor Podcast. I talk with guests about rack rigs, about pedalboard rigs. I got celebrity guitar players, I got everyday guitar players, and I have some of the best rig builders in the world that are coming on, sharing their stories with me and giving you their best tips. So I highly recommend you check it out. Secondly, we have a Patreon page now, so if you want to get direct coaching with me, the Rig Doctor, one-on-one, there's options for you to do that. There's also additional memberships as low as $4.99 a month, where you can get private Q&As with me, private live streams. It also grants you early access to some of the products that we're coming out with in advance of everybody else, just like our brand new pedal boards that you saw me build this rig on. So you can purchase those even before some of our dealers have access. We also give you free shipping on all Vertex items, and you get special deals and discounts just by way of being a member. Also, I noticed that less than half of you that are watching these videos are subscribers, so I highly invite you to subscribe, like, leave a comment, and hit the bell icon so that you can receive the most up-to-date information when we're coming out with new videos and new content. So let's get into it. My personal rig build, haven't done it in years. This is the first rig I've had in probably a decade. So let's do it. The Rig Doctor's own rig build. Let's go. My name is Mason Marangella. I build rigs for the industry's top professionals. Now I'm teaching guitarists how to build rigs like the pros with DIY tips, easy mods, and all the tricks of the trade. I am the Rig Doctor. So why am I building a rig with this stuff? Well, it's pretty simple. I'm a huge fan of John Mayer. I'm a huge fan of Stevie Ray Vaughan. I'm a huge fan of the classic dumble tones that are out there. And I needed a rig that would give me the ability to go through all those different types of effects, all those different types of sounds. But the other thing is that I love amplifiers, I love wet, dry, wet, I love stereo, I like mono sometimes, and I like using amps with effects loops. So I wanted to have something that was versatile enough to keep up with any possible combination that I would want to put this pedal board into in terms of pedal board plus amp. So I built it to do everything. And the cool thing about the Line 6 HX effects is that I'm able to reroute my signal path in any way that I want. And I actually have my switcher, the Morningstar ML5, wired in to one of the loops inside the HX effects. So I can swap my distortion devices before or after effects that are all inside of the HX effects. I can reroute it for stereo. I can route it for 4 cable method if I have an amp with an effects loop. I can route it wet, dry, wet. It does it all. So the thing that's cool about this, I can show up to any of the blues jams that I might go to or any of the jam situations, and I can make it work with literally any type of amp, and I have all the tones I need in a sub 20 pound 11 by 20 package. Now in terms of the signal path of this rig, I'm going directly into a custom interface. I have a cool tutorial above if you want to check out how to make your own version, a passive version of this very same interface. So guitar's coming in, then it's going directly into the HX effects. From the HX effects, I'm then using one of the effects loops in it to send out to the Morningstar ML5. This is essentially my programmable switcher that doesn't have any foot switches on it. It's just the loops part of it, and I'm actually using MIDI to have the Line 6 HX effects turn everything on and off. After it goes through the ML5, which has all of my analog pedals in it, comes back then to the HX effects and the return of that loop, and then the send of another loop goes out to the front of the amp. From there, I either have the option to route everything in front of the amp, or I can use one of the additional outputs of the main amp outputs to run a stereo amplifier. If I don't want to do that and want to use 4-cable method, I can come back in to the second effects loop, run through my wet effects inside of the actual HX effects itself, and then send it back to the effects loop return from there. I can also run it wet, dry, wet in that exact same scenario and use one of the other outputs from the left and right out to run to a second wet cabinet. But let's not wait any longer. Let's see how I put this rig together. Now, first things first, I had to drill out some holes in this board because I needed to mount some risers. Now, I do have risers that hinge, but in this particular case, because I didn't need to have any extra space or double my surface area, I elected to mount everything topside. This allows me to get access to everything quickly and not have any need for the riser that has a hinge on it. That means I can hide stuff underneath it. I didn't need that here. So I'm really careful when I go and I add in my risers, and in this case they're from fixed pedal boards, that I tape everything out in the exact spacing that I want, I mark it with a drill punch, and then I go in and drill each hole as needed so I can have it in the exact position that I need. You'll watch me throughout this use blue painter's tape to exactly mark out the spacing of the riser so I don't have any mistakes as I'm doing this. I'm also drilling the holes slightly larger than they need to be so that I have a little bit of forgiveness if it's not quite perfectly in alignment. And of course, I'm using a little bit of a Dremel tool here to make sure that I don't have any sharp edges when I do have to drill through the board. Next, I'm getting into assembling the actual power cables. So what I'm doing once I determine the spacing of the pedals, I'm routing starting with the pedals first with the cable plugged in and then moving the flow of the power cables toward the power supply. I'm going to cut them roughly to length and then fine trim them and solder them in place once I have everything routed into the power supply. That way I can actually remove the power supply once I have all the cables sort of cut to their approximate length, and gives me some room to then come in, solder in place, and be able to get those cables exactly to length. This is a really easy technique that you can use when you're doing your own rig so that you don't have excessive cables that are hanging off the board, or you have any spaghetti that you have to hide under other pedals so that it has the appearance of looking neat. This is a very easy way to do it. Last, I'm getting into doing all of the audio cables. Now, once I have everything nicely planned out with the power supply, this makes it a lot easier. I have finite spaces in looms already starting to be created from the power. This way I can come in and I can start following those exact same paths that I've already laid with the power and route them nicely. Now, in this case, it makes it really easy because I have my fixed pedal board risers. Those are hollow underneath or are routed so that I can route pedals right underneath them, and I can route cabling right underneath them. This makes it incredibly easy for me to be able to maximize all of my space, and I don't have to sacrifice any room unnecessarily for cable routes. I'm also at this exact same time wiring MIDI into the Morningstar. This is something that's going to allow me to use the HX effects to control the Morningstar looper. Essentially, the HX effects becomes my foot switch component to my actual programmable looper, and I can bring any of the analog pedals in and out in any sequence that I want in combination with any of the effects in the HX effects, either pre or post, which is super cool. And I'm using the exact same technique here where I'm sort of wiring all of the cables into my source, which in this case is the HX effects, the same way that I wired all my power cables into the source, which was the actual power supply itself. This makes it easy for me to keep it nice and neat, have everything flowing perfectly, and not have any extraneous cables, any unnecessary bundles happening on the pedal board. The other thing I want to mention is that it's important when you're doing your soldering of your cables, and please do solder your cables. I have a good video about why you should solder versus using solderless above here, is you want to make sure that you're using high quality cables like I am, Mogami 2524 or Mogami 2319, which is exactly what I have here. Also, I'm using square plugs. Using a high quality, low profile plug like this for your straight and your right angle or pancake style, if you will, is incredibly important. Keeps the capacitance low because every plug has a capacitance, and also just makes it reliable. It sucks when you have to chase down problems with your plugs because they're not working properly or weren't built properly from the manufacturer. I've had 100% success rate so far using square plugs, and I've been using them exclusively for about 8 months now, and I couldn't be happier. I highly recommend you check out our friends at Bestronix, which are linked below, for those materials or any of the stuff that we're going to be using today in this video. So here it is in its glory. I pretty much have it done at this point. I just did some labeling there on the edge of the HX effects, so I was certain that I knew where everything went, just so I didn't have any wires being crossed or put into the wrong place. I think using blue painter's tape on cables is actually a really easy way just to keep track of where they're going so that you don't accidentally solder something in the wrong place, which can be a real pain in the butt to undo, especially with something as tight and as compact as this is. The other thing is I still need to wire in that last MIDI cable going into the Morningstar so I can start getting the HX to talk to it. And then I'm also going to have my USB interface and my expression pedal interface that's going to sit right on top of that one spot that I'm just going to build real quick. But let's get into the tones, how it routes, how it sounds. Let's check it out. Before we get into the playing examples, I wanted to show you exactly how I'm setting this up in combination with the HX effects and the Morningstar. First things first, as I talked about before, I have the Morningstar looped into loop 2. This is the send and return number 2 in the HX effects. I'm only putting effects after it, but if you wanted to put effects before the Morningstar looped pedals, you would just do that in the signal path by putting those in before send and return 2. In my case, I'm putting send and return 2 first. I'm adding in some delays in series in front of the amp, and then I'm going into a wet, dry, wet scenario where I have the delay and reverb in parallel and mixed at 100% wet. Now, the other thing to notice is if you go into the Windows side of the HX Effects editor, you can actually in Command Center set up foot switches individually to correspond with the Morningstar. So the way that you do that in Command Center is you can talk to the foot switch that you want. You select the foot switch, you can name it with whatever pedal is in there, and then you can assign it a CC number. Now, the CC number corresponds to the manual. If you look on the Morningstar website, that you can see that loops A through E correspond with CC numbers 6 through 10. So number 6 would be the first loop, 7 would be the next loop, 8 would be the next loop after that, etc. So all you're going to do, if I want the very first loop, loop A, I would set that to CC number 6. And I leave all of the MIDI channels on number 1. You can adjust that in the Morningstar if you want it to be transmitted on a different channel, but I think the default is at 1. I didn't adjust that. I just left it as it came and then adjusted the CC numbers from there. And then I can also, in addition to renaming it, I can select any sort of LED color that I want so that it helps me recognize what the actual effect is. So really easy to do that all inside of the software of the HX effects. Now let's get to the playing. that's my new rig. It's incredible sounding. I'm super impressed with all the processing power of the HX effects. If you're considering a rig that incorporates the very best of your favorite analog overdrives and the very best of modern technology in digital processing, I can't think of a better combination than pairing the Morningstar with the HX effects and using those in conjunction to basically be a glorified loop programmable switcher that does all of your MIDI, can do all your presets, and you can really arrange in any possible routing that you want and use any combination of amplifiers, whether that be mono, stereo, 4-cable method, wet, dry, wet. You can do all that routing internally and not have to do anything to the pedal board itself. Again, I highly recommend that you check out our interface video. It will enable you to be able to maintain the cabling on the pedal board and only make adjustments on where you plug into the interface to route it in all the different possible fashions. I also, again, would love to invite you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like, give us a comment. That's all really helpful for us in optimizing the video for YouTube. Also, please check out our Patreon if you're interested in having more value-added services as a part of what we're already doing here with Vertex and the Rig Doctor channel. Also, check out our podcast, which is available on all platforms that serve podcasts, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, etc. We have about 5 or 6 episodes up already. Until next time, I'm Mason Marangella, the Rig Doctor. See you later.